Hello, hello.
Hello, hello,
Welcome to
hello.
another. Yeah, Bobby, take it away, man.
No, I'm just saying hello. I was saying hello with you, but
All right, yeah,
welcome back,
yeah. We got
everybody.
welcome to another episode of the Gedunk Podcast. I believe number 3. We have got some exciting stuff to talk about today. Very exciting stuff. A lot of stuff in the news that is happening this week, and things that we hope to give you a little bit of perspective on and just talk about. And as always, we're starting to get some comments on the YouTube channel. We love it, guys. I'm going to get on there, start replying to the comments, and thank you so much for tuning in and checking it out. Big news in the last 48 hours, the plane crash in Washington, D.C., outside Reagan National, right over the Potomac. Horrible news. First American airline aircraft crash in the United States since 2009.
Hmm.
Um, it sounds like it was a midair collision with an Army helicopter. The Army's released the names of the soldiers who were killed, and about 60 folks, all souls, lost on the American Airlines flight. And so our heart goes out to the family, and just a just a tremendous loss of life and loss of potential and wonderful young kids who are athletes and folks like that. So we hopefully next week we think it might be interesting to have somebody on who knows a little bit more, probably an aviator, and talk a little bit about some of the issues as they both of this crash, but in general, I don't know how air traffic control works and that sort of thing. So hopefully that's something we can line up for next week.
No, yeah, heart goes out to all the families. First of all, the soldiers, aviators that were caught up in that, and then the families of specifically, this was a group. Many of them were figure skaters, ice figure skaters for Team USA, or potentially were going to be that. Um, I wish I could say this is the first time this has happened, but in 1961, I believe the same thing happened to U.S. figure skating. We lost a generation of talent, but most importantly, we lost young, vibrant people with their whole futures ahead of them and families, talented mentors and coaches, and so and we're not going to get into the whole politicization of this, which is I find absolutely objectively foul. But what we will do is more details come out. We have a bunch of friends of ours that are pilots, and they understand that I controlled aircraft in the Navy, as part of our roles as air defense commander on cruisers and destroyers. So I have basic fundamental understanding of those things, but the details that obviously matter in a tragedy like this. We're going to get actual subject matter experts to talk about, but first let's give the proper time and space for everybody to mourn the loss and to breathe, and then we'll look into how we can prevent it later. But now is not the time to politicize that. I was very disgusted by some of the actions I saw immediately thereafter. So
Yeah, when we couldn't say it better myself. When we in medicine, you hear about medical errors, which do happen
mm-hmm.
sometimes, and we talk about this sort of they call it the Swiss cheese model of medical
Yep.
errors, right? So there's redundancy built into any system so that bad things don't happen, so mistakes don't happen. So for example, if I order a medication, I don't know, an antibiotic for a patient, the nurse has to go to the nurse first looks at it and makes sure, hey, does this look like the right medication? Does this guy actually have an infection? Is this the right patient? Then he or she goes to the Pyxis and signs out the med and brings it back, and
Mm-hmm.
they have a little swiper on the wristband for the patient, and there's a bunch of so when medical errors happen, there are things kind of have to line up. And the Swiss cheese model is sort of these holes just kind of line up. And normally you go through one hole and you run into a wall that
Mm-hmm.
stops that. But I suspect that as what happened the other night becomes investigated and more details become available, we'll see something similar where there's this Swiss cheese model
Yep.
of error.
No, you're absolutely right. And even in maritime at sea, that Swiss cheese model they talk about all the time. where there's something that failed and then something that was completely avoidable. It's very rare that natural occurrences cause these type of accidents. And the one thing I also will say is America, do not be afraid to fly. Our safety record
course.
in our country is just unbelievable. Worldwide, actually, it's unbelievable, but specifically in America, as you mentioned, 2009. I mean, think about how many millions of people have flown in the United States since that time. So the pilots that are flying every day, millions of people are doing a fantastic job overall. And I know there's all these questions that are out there now that, like I said, as having a brother that is a pilot, that I take it very personal. These guys, these men and women are professionals. They are competent, and they go through a hell of a lot more training and certification than any of us do to drive or operate anything,
Yeah,
with the
the
exception of being outside the
aviation,
military.
the aviation safety standard is it's the thing that other industries study for, how to do this right, how to be safe. So, more
So,
to come on that.
yeah, Dan, you're going to take us down some fascinating things today. So, just to give you an overview of what we got here, Dan's like, we got to talk about this. There's this
Oh yeah.
group
All right,
connection.
guys,
It's like a
buckle
murder
in. So
mystery cult thing.
yeah, this was not intended to be a true crime podcast, but
No.
here we go. So first of all, this starts with a couple of tragedies, and up here in Vermont, we had please Google this, check it out yourself. So there on inauguration day, so Monday, the MLK Day, we had a border patrol agent up here in Vermont who was shot and killed at a traffic stop. The it was a Air Force veteran, a guy named David Milland. By all accounts, a great guy, and there was it hit the local news that there had been a shootout on I-91, which is a road that kind of goes from Springfield, Massachusetts, up all the way to the Canadian border, kind of up the Connecticut River, up to Canada. The other side of the state from where I am, I'm over kind of in the Burlington area, but this part of the state's extremely, extremely rural. We call it the Northeast Kingdom. It's known as the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, and it's really thinly populated. A lot of dairy farms, a lot of small kind of quaint country towns, a lot of lakes, um, a lot the dairy industry, the apple industry. It's a really rural economy, and it sounds like that what happened was there was a pair who were stopped, and they'd been stopped by border patrol, as maybe some state police were there as well. And there's a bit of a standoff, and they had kind of been following these two people. There's a young woman at 21, 22, and a relatively middle-aged man in his early 40s. So the woman's Teresa Youngblood, and the man is a German national, this guy named Felix Backholt. I'm totally butchering that name. And so the reason they popped up on law enforcement's radar is that they had been seen in this little town called Newport, Vermont, which is right up on the Canadian border, and it is very kind of Norman Rockwell, nothing ever happens here sort of stuff. And they'd been kind of walking around for a week in town, dressed all in black, wearing body armor, carrying guns. And the law enforcement had kind of been like, "Hey, let's chat with these people, and
Yeah.
hey, what are you guys up to?" And they're like, "We're here to invest in some real estate." So at some point, the suspicion is, who are these guys? What's going on? Are they running drugs? There's a big fentanyl crisis, just like there's a fentanyl crisis everywhere. So they pull these guys over, and the young woman, the 21-year-old woman, it sounds like shoots and allegedly, right, shoots and kills the cop, and the border patrol agent, and he gets hit kind of in the neck and he's killed pretty
Yeah.
instantly. And there's a bit of a shootout. The German national guy draws a weapon as well, like kind of gets out of the car. He gets shot and killed by border patrol. and then the woman shot a couple of times but survives. They take her down to Dartmouth Medical Center, which is in New Hampshire but close by. So, kind of a crazy story, right? It
Hmm.
could end there. This is where, for me,
Yeah.
things kind of get weird, man. So,
Right.
as some of you maybe who followed me before on social or whatever, I'm a jujitsu guy. I go to jujitsu on one day, and I see my buddy there, who's another one of the black belts there, and he works for Border Patrol. And I'm talking to him. I'm like, hey man, sorry to hear about, did you know this guy? That he's like, no, I didn't know him. I was like, what happened? And he's like, what we're hearing is they're part of a cult. I was like, what? And this is not in the news at all. This is like,
Yeah.
I was like, cults, like what, like Heaven's Gate, like what kind of, Manson Brothers, like what kind of
Right.
cult? And he's like, we don't know. They said it's some cult from the West Coast. All right. So now it turns out there's a cult called the Zizians. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the Zizians are a West Coast cult, like Bay Area, Viejo, California, right up north of San Francisco, and they follow this guy who's nom de guerre is Ziz, and Ziz has inspired several killings and several near lethal assaults over the last couple of years in the Bay Area, and a couple of murders in Pennsylvania. So it's this nationwide cult. They believe in like veganism. They
Mm-hmm.
believe in um, AI, artificial intelligence is, and rationalism, which is a school of thought.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They have some manifestos online. There's some great articles to kind of read up on what's going on. But they popped up on this radar because there's this shootout with Border Patrol here in Vermont, and a couple days prior, there was a murder in California by a young man. Let me pull up his name. So there's
You gotta be
a
kidding me.
murder in California, Max Snyder, who killed a man named Curtis Lind. All right. Curtis Lind is an elderly man. He's in his 80s. And there's a backstory with this cult. So this guy, Curtis Lind, was had some squatters on his land. Some land in
Mm-hmm.
Northern California. He's got these cult people. This is a couple of years ago. He's got these cultists living on his land. He's like, hey guys, you can't live here. This is my land. You can't live here. So they attacked him with a samurai sword, stabbed him in the face. He lost an eye in the attack. Gets stabbed in the arm, gets stabbed in the chest, and the trial's coming up. So the working hypothesis,
Hold
yeah,
on. Can I stop you there for a second?
yeah, man. Tell me, yeah. What do you got?
You're telling me that a murder in Vermont is linked to a previous murder a couple of years, well, not murder, assault in California, which is part of a larger group. And these dudes went straight Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2 and took a samurai sword
Yes,
to an 82-year-old man.
yeah. So they hack him up with the samurai sword, and he survives the initial assault, and then the trial for these guys who assaulted him is supposed to happen in April,
Right.
and they killed him. They allegedly killed him, right? Like a couple days ago, the 18th of January.
Time out. Killed who? The dude that's going to be on trial?
No, the dude, the 81-year-old guy who got previously assaulted by them, who
They
was
went back and killed him?
they went back and killed him. Now,
Allegedly.
allegedly, here's where it gets real weird, dude. Okay, so Teresa Youngblood, the
Yep.
girl who shot the Border Patrol agent,
Yep.
and the Zizian follower who attacked Curtis Lynn and was arrested for the murder. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
um, are married, and they actually have. Well, we don't know if they're married. In November, they applied for a marriage license.
License.
So they got a marriage license and then committed murders a couple days apart on other sides of the country, all at the behest of this guy, Ziz.
Do
Who,
we know who Ziz is?
all we know about is Ziz has a real name.
Right.
Ziz's real name is Jack Lasoda. Okay, Jack Lasoda, and he's a highly educated. He's a vegan. He's a rationalist, and he's
Mm-hmm.
faked his own death a couple of years back by faking a drowning in San Francisco Bay. But then he popped up on cops' radars. Guys, there's a lot here.
What?
Like, yeah, Bobby, it's getting weird, man. It's getting super weird. And we're up here in Vermont, man. This is not a violent place. This is
That was my next point I was going to bring
yeah,
up. You guys are probably not used to this, especially interstate conspiracy based cult. I mean,
right?
this is something that you expect out of like New York or San Francisco,
Yeah,
Vermont,
it's
where
crazy.
Ben and Jerry's country. Come
That's
on,
right,
man.
man. And so, what's wild about this I mean, there's a lot that's wild about this. Let's start there. But one of the things that's wild about this, so when they were squatting on the dude's property back in the Bay Area, like a couple years ago, before they were going to hack him up with a samurai sword, they were squatting in, it sounds like a couple of vans with Vermont plates.
Uh-huh.
So there's some Vermont connection to this that it's going to get really interesting as things kind of play out. So at what we know right now, two murders, a
Right.
couple days apart. The people
Yep.
who committed the murders allegedly have a marriage license.
Mm-hmm.
There's this radical cult that they all ascribe by Ziz, who is on the lam somewhere and has faked his own death. I believe more than once, but at least once he's faked his own death to get off of law enforcement radar, and
Jesus.
it's something we're gonna have to follow and see where this goes because this is just wild,
This sounds like something that's dropping like on Netflix or Amazon Prime in like a month. The whole
right?
plot, something out of a screenwriter's imagination. But you're telling me this thing is actually real, and you have a mysterious figure that faked their own death and is now giving orders. Dude, that is bone chillingly crazy.
It
And we're
is.
not trying to scare people, but
Oh, this is
this is some.
wild. And
We
like there seems to be, there's a uh not a manifesto. I guess I would call it an anti-manifesto. There is a document on the internet which shows some of their core beliefs. It's written by someone who left the cult, and it talks about they need to be willing to commit violence and never surrender and kind of all these sorts of things. And you could directly see how a 21-year-old, but it's such a bizarre set of circumstances because I mean, 21-year-old vegans who like are from the Bay Area, that's not who you think of shooting it out with the
no,
cops, right?
no.
Yeah,
Wow. I think this is fascinating for a few reasons. You know, our generation, Gen X, we saw a lot of these different little cults, sets, stuff like that. We saw the Branch Davidians in Waco.
yeah.
We saw the rise of manifestos and the school shootings. I mean, we're the original generation that absorbed a lot of that. And I think what people fail to understand about this, and I'm not a psychologist, this is just Bobby Jones's observations of the
Yeah,
world, is when you have wayward souls that don't have a cause or a crew, they become more susceptible to anything. I
yeah.
mean, heck, a lot of people join the military because they want that sense of purpose and they want people around them that are like minded, right? Okay, that's us, but then what happens when you don't have that military option or you need something else? Where does the lost soul go, right?
100%, dude. And
You
like,
know,
and Bobby, another thing too, man, is like think about if you are that type of person who feels lost, you're looking for something, whatever it is, um, you, I feel like all human beings like kind of want to be on the inside, right? Like you
Yes.
want to feel like you kind of know something that other people don't know. You
Hmm.
know that I'm not
Hmm.
sure where that comes from, but it seems to have, especially in the age of the internet, it seems to have
Right.
a lot of effect on what's going
I,
on in the world.
I was literally about to say it's been amplified by social media. Like the way I look at it is everybody wants to be a VIP, but not everybody wants to pay the price to be in the club, right? So what they do, you don't want to pay the big price to be like, going to an elite college, for example, or
Yeah,
you don't want to go through the boot camp and stuff to be in the military. You want to feel elite, and now with social media, you can find people like, hey, I want to be elite too. Well, okay, let's subscribe to this.
yeah,
And because you want that inner recognition, almost like validation from your other fellow human beings, you will allow yourself to be subjected to anything. When I was in Liberia as a United Nations peacekeeper, right, and we only have at that time we only had 30 American peacekeepers out of like a force of 200 and some odd thousand all over the world. Only 30 were allowed to be American. You know, people would ask how Charles Taylor, who started that Liberian Civil War, was able to get children, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old to be soldiers,
yeah.
right? And unfortunately, a lot of it had to do with intimidating. He'd go and basically kill their parents and then have them kill another family member to prove loyalty. But on top of that, through
Jesus.
all, oh, dude, he would go into a neighbor, he would go into a village and find like say a 12-year-old boy, pull him out the hut and be like, "You're gonna fight for me." And of course, the kid's like, "No, I'm not gonna fight for you." And then they would find the father and blow his brains out in front of the father. And
Wow.
then, of course, the kid is like, "Okay, okay, okay, I'll do whatever." And then they give him a gun and make him shoot the mother. So there's a ton of orphans to this day in Liberia. But here's the thing: the psychological conditioning, especially when you rip them out of their family and all this, they still wanted to be part of something. So they had a saying that said, "He killed my ma, he killed my pa, but I will fight for him." These are
Jesus.
the children soldiers who supported a guy who's locked up at the international court at the Hague for
Yeah,
crimes against
he was in
humanity.
prison for life, right?
Yes,
Something like that.
yes, the former president of Liberia. And little old me coming from America, even though American military getting dropped off there, right after the end of the war to help rebuild the country. You're like, how did this happen? That's the first thing you think. And that was my
Yeah.
first real exposure to. There are two things that I learned in Liberia that I will never forget. Number one, that whole premise of no matter what you go through, you want to feel like you're part of something,
Yep.
something to bring you some type of validation, no matter how
Sure.
decrepit, evil, or the genesis of it is. And number two, the second thing that I learned, I found an orphanage full of children that were
Right.
orphaned because of these things, and you could tell they were emaciated. They had been living off of whatever they could find. The head of the orphanage, they try to get rice to fill their bellies. So I'm like, look, I can go get you meat. I can get you protein. What is it that y'all want? And they
Mm.
looked me in the eye, all of them. They said, pencil and paper so we can go to school.
Yeah.
And it hit me like a ton of bricks. No matter what a human being goes through, no matter how bad it is, there's this innate desire to want to learn. And these kids were like, we are behind in school. Do that. Man, we got them. I got them computers. I got them. I wrote to people back in the States, Naval Academy Alumni Association. They sent all sorts of office supplies and stuff like that because it was so spellbinding to me. Just like, that's what you want, not
Yeah.
food, but to learn in a safe environment. So yeah, those are
What
the two
year were
things I
you in
took from it.
Liberia?
2007, oh,
2007.
that
And
entire year basically.
that was post Civil War. Like, break it
Hmm.
down for the audience. Tell us, give us the.
Yeah, so Liberia, just using that, we're on this tangent now, but Liberia was founded by America.
Mm,
So America at one point thought that they wanted to get into the colonization game in the early 1800s, but they decided against it. But what they did decide to do is to send some of the slaves that had been brought over back to West Africa.
yep.
And so America sent these people back. They called it Liberia. The Constitution of Liberia was actually drafted and written at Harvard. Okay. And so Liberia is the only country in Africa that was never colonized because it was started by America. The capital city is Monrovia, named after our fourth president, James Monroe, who
Okay.
chartered that to happen, right?
Yep.
And so, long story short, the freed slaves returned back to West Africa and they mimicked the same society that they saw in America. They created a caste system, slaves of the natives, and the ones that came back became the upper class, like they had just left because they knew no different, right? Well, let's just say that caused a lot of turmoil over the years. And post World War II into the Cold War, in the 80s, you had a young enlisted man, basically an E3, rise to power by the name of Samuel Doe. And the United States backed him because it was either you're going to be with the Soviets or United States. The largest rubber plantation on Earth is still there, and the Firestone Company bought that back in the 1800s. So they were aligned to be American. So they supported him and his being despotic and this, that, and the other. Well, one day everybody got tired of it. The natives literally rose up against those people, and they assassinated him on the beach.
Okay.
Right? Caused more unrest, and then Charles Taylor, who was from Liberia, was educated, guess where? Harvard, comes back, and he takes over with his war, and he enlists child soldiers to do it. He keeps power, then he gets overthrown, but then he comes back and gets power again. But he caused all sorts of crimes against humanity. He finally is ousted for good. The United Nations and ECOWAS, the Economic States of West Africa, come in and establish order, and they elect Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who also went to Harvard and went to the States and came back. She was the first, I want to say, the first female president in Africa at the time, and, established now an actual democracy and stuff like that. But the cost of being someone that's 9 years old and people listening to you because you have an AK-47 stock, and then 6 years later, no one's listening to you. They're mad at you because you were someone that conducted war and maybe killed family, but yet you didn't have a choice in the matter, and you're trying to reconcile in that society.
Yeah.
I was civil military relations, so I helped the reconciliation process.
Gotcha.
And when people say, America's divided, there's no hope, I'm like, bro, I've seen a hell of a lot worse. We were nowhere near that. But the principles of reconciliation are still the same. So going back to our original point with the Zizians and stuff like that, when you have people who do not feel like they're a part of something, that's when it's dangerous. And that starts all the way back in grade school when you're sitting at lunch by yourself. Right now, what we're seeing now is it's manifesting with school shootings and stuff like that. But it's the principle, the same thing. People want to feel like they're part of something that has meaning. It's an innate human trait. And what makes America great at its greatest point is people can unify around something, feel part of a group, regardless of where their backgrounds come from. That's what's beautiful about it. And we have completely forgotten that, which is tragic because we have been around the world and we've seen when it goes wrong the other way. Right? So when you talk about the Zizian thing here, it just all this floods back, and you're like, "Holy crap, man!"
Yeah, there's this quote about. I mean, it's really about. I don't know who said it, but man, it stuck with me. There's this quote. If someone can make you believe absurdities, they can make you commit atrocities. And
Yes.
and so it's following. Ziz is probably pretty absurd. We're gonna get more into that as the show goes on, but he's getting people to to kill human beings, kill other human beings, and he's doing that by affecting their worldview and making them believe that they need to do it for the group, right? It's really the way membership in a group can just fuck with your mind to the point that you'll do crazy stuff for that group.
Yes.
Is it's a trend throughout history, right?
I was about to say throughout history and at different levels. Okay, in this case, you're talking about maybe 100 people max, maybe more, whatever. But historically speaking, people are like, well, how did Germany allow the Nazi Party to become the Nazi Party? Sure. Well, when you unbelievably go out of your way at the end of World War One to exclude an entire nation state and then dump on them too, they're going to be susceptible to someone to be like, hey, you're still special.
Yep.
I can give you a sense of purpose. Totally. This, that, and the other. People who enlist in what we did in the Navy, in the Marine Corps, whatever branch of service. I don't know what to do with my life, man. I'm a pretty talented person, but I have no sense of purpose. United States Marine Corps, as extreme as people say they are, I'll give you purpose real quick.
Yeah.
As soon as you step on these yellow footprints, here's your purpose.
Yeah.
Right? And so you buy in, right? You buy in, we all buy in. We did it in the military, but you got people that buy into corporate America.
Sure.
There are lawyers, there are financial advisors, but they buy into the mindset, right? And the thing that we have to be careful is there's a balance of buying into the mindset, being part of a group, having a sense of purpose, but still keeping your eyes and ears open to hear different perspectives and introduce different thought patterns to not only keep your mind stimulated, but to be able to find compromises and like platforms to bring more people together.
Yep.
I fully believe that you get more done with the word and instead of the word or. And what has
Oh, I
happened
like that,
here,
man. I gotta.
well, I wish I could tell you that I
Yeah.
got it. I came up with it, but no, there was a guy in my leadership Georgia class that talked to us about that specific thing, and I never thought of it before. But if you look at the progress of human history, if you look at any government, any nation state, this, that, and other, when they used the word and, they became better.
Yeah.
When they started saying or, they started to fall apart.
Huh.
And I think that's what's changed here when people talk about all the climate in America. Well, to be honest with you, the last 10 years, we've been talking about or, you're with me or you're against me, instead of and. I want you to be this and I want this person to be. It's a completely different mindset,
Mm-hmm.
right? United States of America is the ultimate definition of and when you think about it. And there
Yeah.
are other styles of governments and stuff like that that are the ultimate definition of or.
I think that's right on, man. I mean, I've said before that I don't think we ask enough from our young men.
Mm-mm,
We've
mm-mm,
advanced in such a way as a society that um, as time has gone on, you've gotten more leisure time. Life has
mm-hmm,
gotten
mm-hmm,
materially easier, right?
mm-hmm.
200 years ago, they didn't have a grocery store. You walk in and get whatever you want for dinner, right? You
Right.
were working in the field or something like that. And you were working in a factory beyond that. And, everything that we have now, which is great, it's sort of, there's this whole kind of, you can make money, lots of money
Mm-hmm,
by selling people on,
mm-hmm,
this is going to make your life easier. This is leisure. This is fun, and that's good to a point. But
mm-hmm.
when you've gotten to that point, when you've gotten to this point where everything's just kind of on a platter,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have an identity in your job, right? You're not going down
Right.
600 feet below earth to
Right.
mine coal with your uncles.
Right.
It changes the equation a little bit, and I think we lose that. I mean, that's what that's how we get people to join the military now.
Mm-hmm.
Is, hey, you
Yeah.
join the military, you're special, and you're part of something bigger than yourself, right?
Right.
And
And it helps justify a lot of the effort that you put in to be part of that group. I think if those who have not served in the military, or even take it a step further, public law enforcement, emergency first responders, and you
sure,
walked both of those paths. I think what people fail to realize is the concept of proving yourself to be true, proving yourself to be worthy of the responsibility is its own thing, separate than what you go on to do,
yep,
right? The proving ground does two things. One, yes, it shows that you meet the standards that are going to be high for doing that type of work, but it also proves to you that you could do something that most of us thought we couldn't do when we started.
yep,
You know what I'm saying? You're like, oh yeah, I'm going to try blah blah. In the back of your mind, there is significant doubt. I've watched documentaries on firefighting training and stuff like that. And
yeah,
every sailor in the Navy, we all have to become firefighters on ships, so we all go to firefighting school. But that's basic stuff to keep the ship to survive. But these guys, like the PJs that jump into fires and stuff
right,
like that, the level of training, I literally say to myself, there is a disconnection that has to happen between logic based self preservation and like get the job done, because what they're asked to do is unreal. And if you ask the average person, hey, this time next year you're gonna be able to do that, they're gonna look at you like you're crazy.
yeah,
Crazy.
yeah.
Or I've been out there to buds and watched what those guys go through in the first few weeks. I'm like, what? You know what I'm saying? You volunteer to do it, you want to meet it. But even you guys are wired different.
Well, I think that first of all, whatever the quote is, 80% of success is just showing up, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
if you say, "Hey, I'm gonna give something a shot,"
Yep.
I remember this story, not a story. I mean, it's my story, right? When I was a kid, there was a travel baseball team, and I'm probably in like seventh grade. It
Mm.
was like the first. I remember it was the first. You go from little league to like Babe Ruth, right? So it was the first time you're playing on like the big diamond.
Mm.
And there was some travel team. I wasn't very good at baseball. I was fine for my town, but you had to try out, and so the tryouts were Saturday morning for this travel baseball team that was four or five towns. And I was talking to my dad, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to try out. I mean, I'm kind of nervous, to go and to fail, basically. And my dad was like, listen, you can do that. You don't have to try out, but you'll just never know, right? You'll never know if you
Mm.
could have been on that team.
Mm.
And I still think about that, when I try something new, right? Like whatever it is, whether it's going to buds, going to medical
Mm-hmm.
school,
Mm-hmm.
doing emergency room, whatever it is, right? Talking to my wife, right? But the first time
Yep.
I met her, right? You never
Yep.
know if you don't give it a shot.
Oh.
And so much of what we see with young men especially
Mm-hmm.
is kind of a fear of taking that first step. I think.
What do the kids call it? FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah, yeah,
It's there. But what's interesting is, and I think generationally, that FOMO, that fear of missing out, for us was like the catalyst for us to go try it.
yeah,
As opposed to now, a lot of guys are like,
yeah,
I'm good. I'm good.
yeah,
I'll hang here. And one reason we're talking about guys, I have two daughters, and they're like, hey, can I go do it? It's like you
yeah,
got to. It, my personal experience having two daughters, teenager and one in college, is it's about removing barriers for them to go do it as opposed to trying to motivate them to go do it, which
sure,
with when I coach these guys locally here in Atlanta and stuff like that, it's like I have to show and provide the reasons and the goals. And that goes back to the original point of this whole segment, and that is, if you do not have something that drives you to be better, to be part of a group that is trying to excel, you will be susceptible at worst to a group like the Zizians, and at best you will subscribe to apathy and never hit your full potential.
yeah,
And
man,
that's what you got to be concerned about.
yeah,
But
and that's
now
true.
now now moving on
Yeah,
to the
let's
next
talk
thing
about
that we want
people
to
who
talk about.
got some.
Right. The exact opposite of this. Now,
Exact
this is
opposite.
something that you wanted to talk specifically about, the anniversary of a particular battle, and one of the heroes that is going to be basically our anonymous badass of the week.
Yep,
But
yep.
I'll let you take it from there and set the scene.
All right, so the Tet Offensive. All right, so the battle. So the Vietnam War. If you don't know, I think most people are at least somewhat familiar with the Tet Offensive. So Vietnam War kind of starts in, really, it's an extension of the French War in Indochina in the 50s. We start bringing military advisors in there in like 1965. We kind of commit the first combat troops, American combat troops. If you've seen the movie We Were Soldiers Once and Young, that's like very early in the war. And LBJ, the president, right? Like he knows getting into Vietnam is this quagmire, and he's always he really wants to kind of win the thing and get out, even though he probably believes that's not really possible. So he gets General William Westmoreland, who's like this World War II kind of hero guy, and Westmoreland takes over in Vietnam, and he's constantly feeding back to the American press like, we're winning, we're way ahead of schedule, we're kicking ass, we're taking names. There are war correspondents from the newspapers and radio and TV who are in Vietnam who are like, it doesn't feel like we're winning. But the official line is, we're winning, we're winning. So in 1967, the North Vietnamese have a plan for what they call a general uprising, and the guy who puts it together is this guy named Le Duan. And Le Duan is I forget his actual role within the Communist Party, but he's basically the one who like actually calls the shots. Like he's the shot caller. Ho Chi Minh's sort of like the head of state, but Lay's one is like the guy who's really making decisions at this point. And there's going to be a general uprising in South Vietnam, across the South, across all these cities in the South, and we're gonna the North Vietnamese think that the South Vietnamese are going to rise up and throw out the Americans, and it's that'll be the end of the war, kind of thing. So they plan this offensive for Tet, the holiday, the Vietnamese New Year. In Tet is a series of kind of street festivals. It's in 1968 when this happens. It's like at the end of January. Uh, and so on January 30th, they kick off the Tet Offensive in 1968. So 57 years ago today, basically, they kick off the Tet Offensive. And there are all these attacks. There's attacks in Saigon, there's attacks in cities across South Vietnam, and American bases kind of throughout the South. Saigon gets all the press, right? Like they hit the American embassy. There's a squad of Viet Cong who like go like actually breach the American embassy. They're inside the American embassy. They kill a bunch of people. The Americans finally are able to retake the embassy, and this is all over the nightly news. This is Walter Cronkite talking about the U.S. embassy in Saigon. Meanwhile, the NVA and the Viet Cong have attacked a city called Hue, spelled Hue, right? And Hue is sort of right on the coast, kind of midway up South Vietnam. At one point, it was the imperial capital of Vietnam. So it has this great sort of history, this symbolic, yeah. And they have like this, they have a castle basically. They call it the Citadel. It's this old castle that there's part of the city is within the walls of the castle, but there's a greater city surrounding the Citadel, and the units involved. So there's a South Vietnamese army, the Arvin base in Hue, kind of adjacent to the Citadel. And then there's some American advisors at what they call the MACV, the Military Assistant Command Vietnam, in one little base. Okay, so for months, the Viet Cong have been smuggling weapons, RPGs, mortars, grenades, AKs, all this stuff into the city. And they're doing it by, they're putting it in the bottom of like food trucks. They're famously, there's one example of them having, bringing in a bunch of poultry like ducks, to market, and underneath the ducks are all these RPGs. And they kick it off by attacking the MacV compound and the Arvin compound. And the Americans are holding on by like the skin of their teeth. Like hundreds of North Vietnamese soldiers and Viet Cong are attacking the MacV compound. The ARVN are fighting it up a little further north of the city, north of the river that runs through the city called the Perfume River. So what we're going to talk about today is an American relief column. There's a Marine Corps base. I think it's at I think it was called Fulai, but I have to double check that. And so they're like 10, 15 miles south of Hue. Okay. And so they send, a column of soldiers and Marines up to relieve the MacV compound, hopefully drive the VC out of the city. And as they're coming up into the city, kind of on the outskirts of the city, they get ambushed because the NVA expected them to do that, and they get stopped. Right, they get halted. They're just getting shot to shit. I was in an ambush one time myself. This was in an African country with another SEAL, and he said, I forget what we're saying, but he was like, "We're in a dick dragger," and I was like, "Dick dragger, interesting term," but like you're flat on the ground, crawling along, trying not to, trying to be underground as much as you can. So these guys are in a dick dragger, and they're getting hit from these bunkers that the NVA have set up adjacent to the road. And we're going to talk today about Freddie Gonzalez, Alfredo Gonzalez, okay, who is this Mexican American kid from South Texas, 135 pounds. but was all-state football player. Bobby, get this. You're gonna like this. He's 135 pounds and he's an all-state football player and he plays the line. All right.
He's a lineman at
He's a
that size.
lineman at 135 pounds, right? So he must have been hustling, right? He's that kind
Yeah,
of guy.
but borderline crazy.
He's a scrappy dude, man. And so he joins the Marine Corps. You know, he's too small to go play college ball or
Hmm.
whatever. Joins the Marine Corps, and he's on one of these trucks coming up into the city, getting ambushed in this dick dragger. So he's on, in the Marine Corps, there's a lot of kind of pride of what unit you're from. So he's 1-1. So 1st Battalion,
Hmm.
1st Marines,
First,
1st
yeah.
Marine Division out of Camp Pendleton in California. And these guys um, have been in like every Marine Corps battle, like name a battle: Belleau Wood, Iwo
Yep.
Jima, Tarawa. The first Mardiv has kind of always been there, right? So Freddie's like, we're getting shot to shit. I need to do something about this, and this is what he does. Okay, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty, well as serving as a platoon commander. So Sergeant Gonzalez's unit formed as a QRF force. They're
QR. Can you explain what QRF is to
quick
people?
reaction force. You're coming
There
to
you go.
help the guys who are in trouble, right? So he aggressively maneuvers Marines in his platoon, directed his fire until an area is cleared of snipers. Immediately after crossing a river south of Hue, columns again hit by intense enemy fire. One of the Marines on top of the tank is wounded, okay, falls to the ground, exposed position. Sergeant Gonzalez ran through machine gun fire to the assistance of his injured comrade, lifts him up despite receiving fragmentation wounds from an RPG during the rescue, and carries him to a covered position, right? Due to the increased volume and accuracy of enemy fire from a fortified machine bunker on the side of the road, the columns completely halted.
Mm.
Realizing the gravity of the situation, Sergeant Gonzalez he exposed himself to the enemy fire and moved up along the east side of a rice paddy to a dike so this dude is walking across a rice, running
Yeah.
across a rice paddy towards a machine gun bunker, right? So a rice paddy is like 3 feet of water, man.
I was literally about to say, if you,
Yeah,
those listening or watching, if you've not walked or tried to maneuver through a rice paddy, I have. It's like quicksand on steroids, depending on how flooded it is.
right.
So that is not easy.
Yeah, so he's running through, at least knee deep, maybe waist deep water
Hmm.
towards like getting shot at this whole time by this machine gun bunker. He's doing it by himself. So,
Hmm.
he gets there, he gets up towards the bunker, he crawls towards the bunker and throws a couple hand grenades into the bunker and destroys the bunker. Okay. So he's wounded. He is taking out machine gun bunkers by hand with hand grenades, right? But solo. So his unit survives this and moves into the city, right? He stays with his unit. He's refusing medical treatment. And 3 days later, he gets shot again. So February 3rd, again, says, I'm not going to be
That's crazy.
evacuated. His
Yep.
company's pinned down, uh, inflicting heavy casualties with automatic weapons and rocket fire. Sergeant Gonzalez using a number of light anti-tank weapons. So these are called law rockets, is what we call them. They
Hmm.
had them back then.
Hmm.
We still have them today.
Yep. Sure
And
do.
they're these shoulder fired, you know, I guess the close if you're familiar with a bazooka from like World War II, it's the
Exactly.
same idea. It's an anti-tank weapon that an infantryman can fire. It fires a little rocket. That rocket has what's called a shape charge that can punch through armor. All right. So he crawls from, multiple different positions and fires laws into like the enemy emplacements, right?
Hmm.
So he is knocking out bunker after bunker after bunker of enemy heavy weapon
Yes.
stations, right?
While still wounded, by the way, I
Well,
just want
still
to make
wounded.
sure.
He's been wounded several times. He took
Yes.
frag in the first assault, and then got shot.
And then again.
And
Yep.
then a day later, he's doing this. He finally is shot and killed on February 4th, assaulting an enemy bunker.
Hmm.
So the heroism, courage, and dynamic leadership displayed by Sergeant Gonzalez reflected great credit upon himself and the Marine Corps, and were in keeping with the highest traditions of of the U.S. Naval Service. He gallantly gave his life for his country. 21 years old, died in Hue after saving the lives of, if not hundreds, certainly dozens of his
Right.
federal Marines. And that is our badass of the week.
So
Um,
if I may add a little
yes,
bit
please.
to really set the scene, Hue City, um, that battle is one of the toughest the Marines have ever fought. And understand the Marines have a history of fighting the toughest of combat since they've come into existence November 10th, 1775. That being said, the urban combat that it introduced to America, which was, we had it in World War II too, but this was different, where it would more look like what you guys went through in Afghanistan and Iraq than what World War II vets went through when they were trying to get to Berlin, for example. Much more disorganized. The ambush thing, who's the enemy, who's the friend, that whole thing they had to deal with. The thing about it that I think, and you talked about a little bit, but I want people to process this. We're talking about the smuggling of unbelievable catches of weapons, right? And so this ambush was coordinated with really none of the modern technology that we would use to organize an attack. And the quick reaction force, that's why I wanted you to talk about. The quick reaction force is designed to jump into the deepest parts of the shit and try to regain some stability, right? You don't know what you're necessarily getting into. You get the basics and you roll. Again, going back to Liberia, we had that in our forces, a QRF that, okay, this is disrupting at the port. This is doing this, that, and the other. America has that. My Riverine Squadron, we specialize in doing that. It's hard because you're trying to figure out black and white scenarios in the ultimate gray, right? I guess that's the best way to put it. The other thing about this is, for someone to be as young as this man was, right? He made a mental decision that I guarantee you, anybody that talked about him growing up, they saw it in him playing football. They saw it in him being outmatched and outweighed and this, that, and the other. And let me tell you something, as a sailor, we have our little brotherly rivalries with the Marines and something like that. But I will say this, there's something about that force. It's something when they get that EGA, or the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor, when they earn that thing, there's a part of the human psyche that is unlocked in those individuals that I've not seen at a mass level like that anywhere else in the world. This guy, so for his legacy, right, it's not just that he got the Medal of Honor. And that was upgraded, actually. It took, towards 2018, I want to say, is when they upgraded that. Um, and this goes, and this is something we kind of hinted at a little bit when we talk about Medal of Honor. Depending on when it was, the criteria changes, and then people can make it political and not want to give. There was always this thought, especially in our wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, that you didn't want to give out too many Medal of Honors because it would talk about how intense the fighting was. It would convey to the American people that these conflicts are more serious than, say, politically people were willing to admit. And so I guarantee you, just like these guys got their recognition decades later, people that we know personally or something like that are probably going to be upgraded in their awards when it's politically no longer damaging to do so, right? Which blows my mind. But the USS Gonzalez is named after him, DDG 66. So you're talking about one of the most capable warships in the world. In the ship, every ship gets a crest when they are commissioned, and in that crest, the Congressional Medal of Honor, the Gold Star, the flaming sword, talking about the way he attacked. His personality is embedded in the actual crest and in the ship, which is saying something. And USS Gonzalez went through its own personal tragedy with collisions and all this other kind of stuff. But the bottom line is, naming a ship is a big deal in the Navy, because that thing is going to last 50 years, 60 years, maybe longer. And it's interesting. You have the USS Hue City, which is a cruiser, and you have the USS Gonzalez, which is the young man, the gunnery sergeant that won the Congressional Medal of Honor there. That should tell you how intense the fighting was and how spectacular this man's actions was. I mean, man, I could barely put on my uniform correctly at age 21 at boat school, man. So for him to be doing this, it's quite amazing. And for him to be just some guy from Texas
Yeah,
that
yeah, it's
just made a mental
wild.
decision.
You
It's
know,
crazy.
I agree with all that. You know, the Marine Corps, I worked a lot with them.
Hmm.
My combat story, which we don't need to get into too much, but you know, my biggest combat was in Fallujah, and Fallujah
Hmm.
was, you know, at the time in the press accounts and things like that, they were always saying,
Hmm.
you know, the biggest urban battle since Hue.
Yep. Since Hue
And
City. Yep.
I've kind of, you know, I think probably in part because of that, I developed this fascination with Hue. You know, if you in popular press, Full Metal Jacket is,
Yeah,
yeah,
I was thinking that. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the
Uh,
movie about Hue. That's kind of like the two-part movie. The first part's in boot camp,
hmm. And then
second
they
part's
will
in
deploy.
Hue.
Yep.
Yeah, and it was I think about 250, 300 Marines were killed. We lost
Hmm.
100, 150 in Fallujah or so. And
This is where Walter Cronkite famously said the war is unwinnable. That's how bad Hue City was.
yeah, yeah. And
And
he went to
and
Hue.
yeah, he did.
Yeah,
And
yeah, he flew over and you know, was on the front lines.
yeah,
Um,
and
Bobby, you'll like this, man. The you know who they sent? You know the Marine Corps sent to kind of take over the battle about a couple days later
mm-mm,
was this
who?
guy, this Marine guy. I don't know if he was a colonel or full or lieutenant colonel, but Ernie Cheatham is his name. And
Mm,
Ernie, he was called Big Ernie Cheatham, and he was a
mm.
lineman for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
nuts.
yeah, man.
And that it's kind of funny. People don't realize, but the Vietnam War, when they say a draft, and you have multiple guys that played in the NFL
Yep.
that fought in that war, to include Roger Staubach, who won the Heisman and had to wait 4 years before he could play for the Dallas Cowboys.
What
Would you
did
say it was a,
Staubach do in the fleet?
so he was a supply officer? So
Right.
Staubach, and this is a good lead into our last segment.
Yeah.
Staubach was colorblind when
Uh,
he went through. So you know when we reported on
yeah.
I Day to the Naval Academy, we would go
Yeah.
through all that stuff. We had the colorblind test. Staubach listened to the guy ahead of him and repeated what he said.
I didn't
That
know
got
that.
him through. And then they found out like his sophomore year he was truly colorblind, right?
Interesting.
But so he went supply corps, but he did his tour of duty in Vietnam, and famously he wrote the Dallas Cowboys to send him some footballs to throw. So while he's down there, and Tex Schramm was like, "Roger, we sent you a bag of balls freaking 6 months ago. What happened to all the balls?" Roger writes back and said, "A mortar shell hit the storage facility, and all of them got blown up. Could you please send more?" And Tex Schramm was like, "Oh my God, yeah, here we go." And he sent them
That's
bags and
wild.
bags of footballs. But speaking of football,
Yeah,
leading into
football, man.
so I would love to say, and this is going to lead into Bobby's Barnacles. I would love to say that the NFC and AFC championship football games to determine who's going to the Super Bowl was fair and everything was on the up and up. And I'm not one to complain about what I call ref ball, but we were both right about Philadelphia. But what happened to the Kansas City Chiefs and Buffalo Bills football game, in my humble opinion, is a travesty. The NFL is the largest sporting league in the world from a revenue standpoint. Okay, my dad, who played for the Atlanta Falcons in the NFL in the 70s, they weren't making near the money they're making now.
Hmm.
And the refs did not make the bad calls they have. You have high definition cameras. I think they had like 40 at Kansas City, and they consistently got calls wrong, and they just happened to benefit the two-time defending, going for the three-peat for the first time, Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist when it comes to this stuff, but how many times can one team get every benefit of a call? It makes what your Patriots did in the 2000s look pretty mundane.
Listen, the
I wa-
Patriots cheat, but I mean they were my team, so
Right, right. And you know what? You sound like the Kansas City fans right now.
yeah, yeah,
They acknowledge that some of them calls were a little iffy.
right.
And one guy, I can't believe I'm saying, he was on social media saying, well, when the Bulls got all the calls when Michael Jordan was on the team, no one cared. Now all of a sudden Patrick Mahomes can't get that kind of treatment. First of all, people did care. We
Yeah,
cared back then. Secondly, if you have a league that, by the way, not only is the number one revenue generator in the world of sports, but it's also the most heavily betted upon sports league
sure.
in the
Yeah.
world,
Yep.
right? Vegas, when you now have a team and the Raiders there, all of this, you have to do better when it comes to the officiating, especially in a game that you knew was going to be close. It was going to probably come down to one possession like it has the last 4 years. And of course it did. And now, as we get ready for the Super Bowl, I'm sitting there salty. Not that I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. I could care less about Buffalo. I'm an Atlanta fan, and I'm still trying to get over 28-3. But you cannot tell me that that game was officiated at the level it should have been with what was at stake. And the NFL will not say that they're sorry or apologize or whatever. That is me on my soapbox, people.
Bobby, I
Bobby's
love it, man.
Barnhouse.
Stay on your soapbox. But here, the one that jumped out to me the most was the face mask that wasn't called. Right? That was pretty egregious.
Yeah, but that's to me the play of the game was where Buffalo intercepted a ball. I want to say it was Darvin Hamlin, the kid that almost died on the field,
Yeah.
intercepts a ball. Xavier Worthy, the wide receiver for Kansas City, has one hand on it, and they give him simultaneous possession and say it's not an interception. But then the ball, as they come down, hits the ground and it's not controlled. And then they don't say it's an incomplete pass either. They say it's a catch for Kansas City. They get 7 points. How many points did Buffalo lose by?
Yeah.
It completely changed the game because it led to a direct scoring drive. I don't understand how you can have cameras, even in the little foam thingies that do the first down. Now they got cameras. They got
Yep.
cameras everywhere. HD is overseen. How can you not get these calls right? You reviewed it and still got it wrong.
Yeah.
That's the part that pisses me off the most.
Yeah.
Where it's like, who do you want in the Super Bowl, Kansas City or Buffalo? It's almost like someone asked that question during the review.
Well, next week we'll have to talk about, our picks for Eagles Chiefs again. But last time it was Kelsey versus Kelsey, which was kind of
Right. Now, now,
now it's yeah. I don't
you're forcing teams that don't live in Philadelphia or Kansas City to hold their nose and pick. And I'm going to tell you right now, because if this was Buffalo versus Philadelphia, the entire country outside of Philadelphia would be rooting for Buffalo because of all the stuff that fan base has gone through, right? But with Philadelphia, and I got family, my brother lives up there. I got family that is from Philly. My wife was born in Philly. I'm telling you right now, man, I can't deal with another Philadelphia parade and they're over there jumping on top of freaking
lighting it
light
on fire.
fixtures and lighting stuff on fire and flipping things. And then it's either that or you deal with the Kansas City fans who are like, we've won 3 in a row. We're the greatest dynasty of all time. It's like pick your poison. I root for the Meteor. That's what I'm
Yeah,
rooting
man.
for.
I don't know. I'm
I mean,
probably gonna root for Saquon. I'd like to see him win one.
I like Saquon. I do like
Yeah.
Saquon. You know what? That may be. We'll talk about it next week.
Yeah,
But that
yeah.
may be it. But that's me on my rant when it comes to a multi-billion-dollar corporation that has a sports league that cannot figure out how to ref its own sports league. I just
Love it. Love it. All right, guys.
that's
Well,
cool.
hey, thanks for listening. We will keep you informed about the Zizians, about
Yes.
Bobby's complaints about the refs,
Yep.
and we'll, as always, talk about some badass people that we respect. So, thanks
Yep.
for listening, and hope to see you again next week.
All right. Thanks, guys. Like and subscribe.